I dare say I've been stupid, but every day I realize the things that she had and that I lacked.
Hollywood has always loved a good rags to riches story. The struggling actor who sleeps on a park bench and then lands the role that changes everything. It makes for great copy. The problem is, a surprising number of the biggest names from the golden age of Hollywood started the race several steps ahead of everyone else. These are the 11 golden age stars you didn't know had rich parents. Number 11, Joan Fontaine. Joan Fontaine is one of the most quietly elegant figures the golden age of Hollywood ever produced. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for Alfred Hitchcock's Suspicion in 1941, had already been nominated for Rebecca the year before, and went on to a career that stretched well past the era that made her famous. What most people remember about Joan Fontaine is her performances. What fewer people know is where she came from. She was born Joan de Beauvoir de Havilland in Tokyo, Japan, on October 22, 1917. Her father, Walter Augustus de Havilland, had been educated at Cambridge University and worked first as a professor of English at the Imperial University of Tokyo, before establishing what Turner Classic Movies describes as a lucrative practice as a patent attorney in Japan. Her paternal cousin was Sir Geoffrey de Havilland, the aircraft designer and founder of the de Havilland Aircraft Company, responsible for the de Havilland Mosquito and a foundational figure in British aviation. The de Havilland family is listed in both Debrett's Peerage and Burke's Landed Gentry. Joan and her father reportedly liked to note that the family counted 2 English kings among its ancestors, Edward II and Henry VIII. Her mother, Lillian Augusta Roos, had been trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London and worked as a stage actress before the family's relocation to Tokyo. When Joan and her older sister Olivia developed persistent health problems, their mother moved the 2 girls to California, while Walter returned to his legal practice in Japan. The parents divorced not long after. Joan grew up in Saratoga, California, attended school in both California and Japan, and eventually decided to pursue acting, which complicated things, since her older sister, Olivia de Havilland, was already building a name for herself at Warner Brothers. Their mother reportedly told Joan that Warner Brothers was Olivia's studio and that she was not to go there. So Joan adopted a stage name, first Joan Burfield, then Joan Fontaine, borrowed from her stepfather's surname, and went to RKO instead. The rivalry between Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland became one of Hollywood's most famous ongoing feuds, lasting the better part of both their lives. They were both nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1942. Joan won. Olivia was not pleased. The details are disputed by both parties, but the estrangement lasted from 1975 until Joan's death in 2013, and, by all accounts, neither sister did much to repair it. What is not in dispute is that 2 sisters from the same distinguished British family, born in Tokyo to a Cambridge-educated lawyer and a Royal Academy-trained actress, both won Academy Awards. That is, by any measure, a remarkable family. Number 10, Olivia de Havilland. Since Joan's older sister has been mentioned, she deserves her own proper entry. Olivia Mary de Havilland was born on July 1, 1916, 15 months before Joan, also in Tokyo, also to Walter de Havilland and Lillian Augusta Roos. She grew up in the same household, attended some of the same schools, and came from the same distinguished background, and she won 2 Academy Awards of her own, for 2 each his own in 1946 and The Heiress in 1949. Olivia's relationship with the studio system is what made her famous beyond her films. In the mid-1940s, after Warner Brothers placed her on suspension for refusing certain roles and then attempted to tack the duration of those suspensions on to the end of her 7-year contract, Olivia sued. The California Supreme Court ruled in her favor in 1944, limiting studio contracts to a maximum of 7 years, including any suspension periods. This became known as the de Havilland Law, and it changed the relationship between studios and actors permanently. No longer could a major studio effectively hold an actor in perpetuity through the clever use of forced suspension. The de Havilland family's connection to British landed gentry, that Cambridge education, the distinguished legal career in Japan, the aircraft designer cousin who built the Mosquito, is the kind of background that doesn't announce itself loudly in Hollywood press releases. Olivia de Havilland played heroines and gentle Southern belles and women of refined bearing. In real life, she was a woman of genuinely refined bearing, educated by her mother in Shakespeare, ballet, and elocution from early childhood. Melanie Wilkes in Gone with the Wind, the role she played in 1939, was not a far imaginative leap. She moved to Paris in 1955, lived there for the rest of her long life, became a Chevalier of the French Legion of Honor, and later a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. She died in Paris on July 26, 2020, at the age of 104, the last surviving major cast member of some of the most celebrated films in Hollywood history, and one of the longest-lived major stars the industry has ever produced. Number 9. Myrna Loy. Myrna Loy is best remembered as Nora Charles in the Thin Man series, the witty, composed, elegantly dressed wife who matched her detective husband drink for drink and quip for quip. In a 1936 nationwide poll of moviegoers, she was voted Queen of the Movies, alongside Clark Gable as King. She made the screwball comedy partnership between a husband and wife look effortless and genuinely fun. She was born Myrna Adele Williams on August 2, 1905, in Helena, Montana, and grew up partly in the small nearby community of Radersburg. Her father was David Franklin Williams, a rancher, a banker, a real estate developer, and the youngest man ever elected to the Montana State Legislature. Her mother, Adele Mae Johnson, had studied music at the American Conservatory of Music in Chicago and was, by the standards of rural Montana in the early 1900s, a woman of considerable cultural ambition. Her father made real estate purchases in California that later proved to be inspired. Among the parcels of land he acquired was a plot that he subsequently sold at considerable profit to a young filmmaker named Charlie Chaplin, who used it to build his movie studio. It was the kind of transaction that only happened to people who had resources to invest in the first place. The connection between the Williams family real estate holdings and Chaplin's studio is one of those historical coincidences that seems almost too good to be true, but it is documented. When Myrna's father died in November 1918 of Spanish influenza, in the same devastating pandemic that killed tens of millions worldwide, the family relocated permanently to California. Myrna was 13. She attended the exclusive Westlake School for Girls in Holmby Hills, continued her dance training, and began appearing in local stage productions at 15. She was not, in other words, a runaway from a poor family who made it to Hollywood on nerve alone. She was the daughter of a Montana rancher legislator developer who had been quietly building a solid financial foundation, even if that foundation was taken from her too soon. Her path to stardom was long and unconventional. Years of being typecast in exotic and vaguely Asian roles before The Thin Man broke her free in 1934. But she arrived in Hollywood with educational advantages, connections, and the kind of practical confidence that comes from having grown up in a family of standing, Montana standing, which is its own particular variety. Number 8, Gene Tierney. Gene Tierney is one of those names that even dedicated classic film fans sometimes have to be reminded of, and then they immediately say, "Oh yes, Laura." Otto Preminger's 1944 film noir. Laura gave Tierney the role that made her famous, the enigmatic title character whose portrait hangs over an entire murder mystery. She received an Academy Award nomination for Leave Her to Heaven in 1945, and throughout the 1940s was one of the most striking presences on the 20th Century Fox lot. She was born Jean Eliza Tierney on November 19, 1920, in Brooklyn, New York, the daughter of Howard Sherwood Tierney and Belle Lavinia Taylor. Her father was a prosperous insurance broker. Her mother was a former physical education teacher from a New England socialite family. The family owned a brownstone in the fashionable Crown Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn and later moved to an estate in Westport, Connecticut. Jean attended a series of exclusive private schools, St. Margaret's School in Waterbury, Connecticut, the Umpqua School in Fairfield, and then was sent to the Brilliantmont International School, a finishing school in Lausanne, Switzerland, for several years. On September 24, 1938, at the age of 17, Jean Tierney made her society debut at the Fairfield Country Club. It was the kind of event that announced a young woman of good family to the world of acceptable social connections, advantageous marriages, and established society. Jean was bored by it almost immediately and decided she wanted to act instead. Her father's reaction to this was practical rather than dismissive. When a Warner Brothers director saw 17-year-old Jean on a family visit to the studio and offered her a contract, Howard Tierney rejected it on the grounds that the salary, $150 a week, was insufficient for his daughter's future. He then went further. He formed a family corporation, Belltier, named for his wife Belle and for Tierney, specifically to fund and promote Jean's career on terms he found acceptable. When Howard Hughes met Jean Tierney and pursued her with his characteristic determination, she was, by multiple accounts, unimpressed. Coming from a wealthy background herself, she was not moved by his wealth. They became lifelong friends. The tragedy of Jean Tierney's personal life, the stillbirth of a severely disabled daughter following a wartime illness, the depression and hospitalizations that followed, the years away from Hollywood, is well documented. What is less often noted is that the platform from which she fell was one built with exceptional care and family resources. She was not just a pretty face the studio discovered. She was a Connecticut debutante whose father built a corporation to manage her career. Number 7. James Stewart. James Stewart is the American everyman, the Mr. Smith who went to Washington, the George Bailey who wanted to live, the Elwood P. Dowd who saw a 6-foot invisible rabbit and was more sensible about it than everyone around him. Nobody has ever looked more like a man from a small town with ordinary concerns and genuine decency. The joke in this entry is that he actually was from a small town with genuine decency, and the family had been running a prosperous hardware store for 3 generations. He was born James Maitland Stewart on May 20th, 1908, in Indiana, Pennsylvania. His father, Alexander Maitland Stewart, known as Alex, was a Princeton graduate who returned home to run the J.M. Stewart and Company hardware store that his family had founded on Philadelphia Street before the Civil War. The store had been in continuous operation since 1848. Alex Stewart had expected his son to continue the family tradition, and to that end, saw to it that Jimmy was properly educated, first at Mercersburg Academy, a respected private preparatory school, and then at Princeton University, where Jim studied architecture and graduated in 1932. His father gave Jimmy a letter when he left to serve in World War II, a letter Jimmy kept in his pocket every day of his service, from the moment he reported for duty as a private in the Army Air Corps in March 1941 through his combat missions over Germany, the Distinguished Flying Crosses, the Bronze Stars, and the eventual rank of Brigadier General in the United States Air Force Reserve. He was the highest-ranked entertainer in American military history. His father ran the hardware store. When Jimmy won the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Philadelphia Story in 1940, he gave the Oscar to his father. Alex kept it in the window of the hardware store until his death in 1961. The hardware store is perhaps the most important detail. It was not a small operation in a town nobody had heard of. It was the kind of solid, multi-generational family business that represented real standing in a community. The kind of standing that sent a boy to Mercersburg and then to Princeton and expected him to come back and run things properly. Jim chose not to come back and run things. He became the greatest American actor of the 20th century instead, which Alex eventually seemed to find acceptable, given the shelf placement of that Oscar. Number 6. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift is one of those actors whose personal legend has somewhat swamped his actual work in public memory. The beauty, the tortured interior life, the car accident in 1956 that reconstructed his face, the decade of decline, the friendship with Elizabeth Taylor, the death at 45. All of it is real, all of it is documented, and all of it tends to crowd out the fact that he was an extraordinary actor who changed what American screen acting looked like. He was born Edward Montgomery Clift on October 17, 1920, in Omaha, Nebraska, the same city and state that also produced Marlon Brando, his only real rival for the title of most influential actor of their generation. His father, William Brooks Clift, was the vice president of Omaha National Trust Company. His mother, Ethel Fogg Anderson, known to everyone as Sonny, was a woman of determined social aspiration who had grown up believing herself to be the illegitimate daughter of Woodbury Blair, which would have made her a granddaughter of Montgomery Blair, Postmaster General under President Lincoln. Whether that lineage was accurate has never been conclusively established. What is established is that Sonny Clift committed herself completely to raising her 3 children as aristocrats, regardless of the vagaries of her husband's finances. The Clift children, Montgomery, his twin sister Roberta, and his older brother Brooks, did not attend regular schools. They were educated by private tutors. They traveled extensively in Europe and America. They were taught French and German until they spoke both fluently. They were exposed to art, music, and the cultural traditions of Europe at an age when most American children were learning multiplication tables and attending public school. When the Wall Street crash of 1929 severely damaged Bill Clift's financial position, Sonny largely refused to adjust their way of life accordingly and continued spending in ways that the family's reduced circumstances did not fully support. The aristocratic pretensions outlasted the money that had briefly supported them. Montgomery made his Broadway debut at age 13 and never went back. He worked in the New York theater for a decade before reluctantly agreeing to try Hollywood, and he arrived there with an actor's craft already fully formed, the product of years of serious stage work that no film school has ever replicated. A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity, Judgment at Nuremberg, the films in which he was at his best, are among the most admired American films ever made. He received 4 Academy Award nominations. He never won, which remains one of the longer-running clerical errors in Oscar history. Number 5. Audrey Hepburn. Audrey Hepburn is the one person on this list whose privileged origins are somewhat complicated by history, because the war took everything, but the origins themselves were about as privileged as origins get. She was born Audrey Kathleen Rustin on May 4, 1929, in Ixelles, Brussels, to Joseph Victor Anthony Rustin, a British subject who had worked as an honorary British consul in the Dutch East Indies, and Baroness Ella van Heemstra, a Dutch aristocrat of Frisian ancestry. Her mother was the daughter of Baron Arnoud van Heemstra, who served as mayor of Arnhem from 1910 to 1920, and then as governor of Dutch Suriname from 1921 to 1928. Ella had grown up in The Hague and spent her summers at the family ancestral castle in Doorn, Utrecht. Her great-uncle Shelto van Heemstra had been Prime Minister of the Netherlands in the early 1860s. The family before the war was a family of genuine European aristocracy. Audrey's childhood included Belgium, England, and the Netherlands, boarding school in Kent, the social world of a Dutch baroness's household, the particular atmosphere of upper-class European life in the 1930s. Her father left the family when she was 6. Her parents divorced in 1938. Then the war came. The German invasion of the Netherlands in 1940 transformed the Van Heemstra family situation completely. Audrey was living in Arnhem, the town that became the site of the Battle of Arnhem in 1944, one of the most catastrophic Allied operations of the entire war. Her uncle was executed by German forces in retaliation for resistance activities. Her half-brother was deported to Berlin for forced labor. Her family ended up living on tulip bulbs during the Dutch hunger winter of 1944 to 45. By the time the war ended, Audrey was malnourished, anemic, and suffering from the effects of years of inadequate food. After the war, her mother found work as a cook and housekeeper to support them. The Baroness. Working as a cook, Audrey eventually made it to London on a ballet scholarship. She was told by Marie Rambert that her height and the physical damage from wartime malnutrition made a career as a prima ballerina impossible. She turned to acting instead. The novelist Colette saw her in Monaco while filming there and insisted that she be cast in the title role of the Broadway adaptation of her novel Gigi. Roman Holiday followed in 1953. The Academy Award for Best Actress followed after that. The fashion icon, the humanitarian, the enduring presence followed after everything. She came from a baroness. She had lost almost everything by the time she was 16. She built everything herself. But the bones of who she was, the bearing and the grace and the European cultural depth and the lifelong awareness of what suffering actually looked like, those came from somewhere very specific. The aristocracy and the hunger both shaped her. You can see it in every performance she ever gave, the way she carried herself. Someone who had known ease and had known its complete absence. Number 4, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. had what is perhaps the most conspicuous family background of anyone on this list, in the sense that his father was literally called the King of Hollywood. And yet Douglas Jr. managed to build a genuine career of his own, a career that included The Prisoner of Zenda, Gunga Din, and a decorated naval service record in World War II that earned him the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the French Legion of Honor, the Croix de Guerre, and an honorary knighthood from King George VI. He was born Douglas Elton Fairbanks Jr. in New York City on December 9, 1909. His father was Douglas Fairbanks Sr., the swashbuckling silent film hero who co-founded United Artists alongside Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and D.W. Griffith in 1919, and who served as the first president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. His mother was Anna Beth Sully, the daughter of Daniel J. Sully, a wealthy industrialist whose money came from cotton trading. His maternal grandfather's wealth was substantial enough that when Douglas Sr. married into the family, the union connected the actor to real industrial money, not just theatrical celebrity. His parents divorced in 1919. When Douglas Jr. was 9, he went to live with his mother, and they were not wealthy in the early years after the divorce. They moved to France at one point, where Douglas attended school in Paris, a detail that gave him his exceptional command of the French language, good enough that he made French language films in Hollywood during the early talkie era for French audiences. He attended a series of exclusive schools: the Hollywood School for Boys, Harvard Military School, the Polytechnic School in Pasadena, and the Lycée Janson de Sailly in Paris. His relationship with his famous father was complicated by the divorce, and complicated further when Douglas Sr. married Mary Pickford in 1920. The couple established Pickfair, their famous Beverly Hills estate, which was known as California's White House and was the center of Hollywood's social world for 2 decades. Being invited to Pickfair was the ultimate Hollywood social validation. Being Douglas Fairbanks Jr., you were presumably always invited, though the dynamic with his stepmother was reportedly not entirely comfortable. What is clear is that growing up with Douglas Fairbanks Sr. as your father, even at a distance, even through the complications of divorce and remarriage, gave you access to a world that most people in Hollywood could only watch from outside. Douglas Jr. entered films reluctantly and partly out of financial necessity. His early career was genuinely difficult. The famous father's name was a standard to measure against, not a guarantee of work. But by the 1930s, he had found his footing, and in the early 1940s, he served in World War II with a distinction that was entirely his own. After the war, he spent much of his time in England, moved easily in royal and aristocratic circles, and by the end of his life was one of those figures whom everyone recognized as representing a kind of civilized elegance that had become rarer in the world. Number 3, Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn is the greatest actress in American film history. That is not a controversial position. The American Film Institute named her the top female screen legend of all time in 1999. And it is worth stating plainly before getting into the question of her family background, because the background is interesting, but the achievement is the point. She was born Katharine Houghton Hepburn on May 12, 1907, in Hartford, Connecticut. Her father, Thomas Norval Hepburn, was a prominent urologist at Hartford Hospital who had trained at Johns Hopkins and maintained his practice there for approximately 50 years. He helped establish the New England Social Hygiene Association, which worked to educate the public about venereal disease, a progressive and at the time controversial cause. Her mother, Catherine Martha Houghton Hepburn, came from the Houghton family of Corning, New York, the family that founded and owned Corning Incorporated, the glassworks company that exists to this day as a major international manufacturer. Her mother had attended Bryn Mawr College, the elite women's college in Pennsylvania, and went on to head the Connecticut Woman's Suffrage Association and campaign alongside Margaret Sanger for women's access to birth control. This was not a quiet family. Katharine grew up in a household where eminent guests arrived regularly: Sinclair Lewis, Emmeline Pankhurst, Margaret Sanger, where controversial political opinions were discussed openly at the dinner table, where children were encouraged to question everything and speak their minds, and where the word can't was treated with deep skepticism. Her father built a 2-story zip line across the yard at the family home on Hawthorne Street. He organized track races for the children. He expected everyone to push themselves continuously at everything. He insisted on cold baths and physical rigor. Kate attended Kingswood Oxford School in West Hartford and then Bryn Mawr College, where she graduated in 1928 with a degree in history and philosophy, the same institution her mother had attended, founded on the principle that women's intellectual capacity was equal to men's. She was not admitted easily. The school had filled its quota for that semester, and she secured her place through the influence of her Uncle George, a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. Once admitted, she worked relentlessly, used a tape recorder to improve her speech, practiced constantly, and threw herself into every production with the energy of someone who had been raised to never do anything by half measures. She told an interviewer in her 80s, "I have no fear of death. Must be wonderful, like a long sleep." That is the voice of someone who was raised to face everything directly and without apology. It came from somewhere very specific. Number 2, Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart is the greatest male movie star in American film history. That is also not a controversial position. The American Film Institute named him exactly that in 1999, placing him above Cary Grant, James Stewart, and everyone else. Rick Blaine in Casablanca, Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon, Charlie Allnut in The African Queen, for which he won his only Oscar. The voice, the face, the cigarette, the world weariness with an intact moral core. He was born Humphrey DeForest Bogart on Christmas Day, 1899 in New York City. His father, Belmont DeForest Bogart, was a prominent cardiopulmonary surgeon, a man of genuine professional distinction and social standing. His mother, Maud Humphrey Bogart, was one of the most successful commercial illustrators in America. In her prime, she earned over $50,000 a year as an illustrator, a figure that, at the turn of the 20th century, represented genuine wealth. She worked for major magazines, produced advertising art that appeared nationally, and was famous enough in her field that she used a drawing of baby Humphrey in a well-known advertising campaign for Mellon's baby food. The Bogarts lived in a fashionable apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. They also had a cottage in upstate New York. They employed household staff. Humphrey was sent to the Trinity School in Manhattan, and then to Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in the United States, which his father had also attended. The plan was for Humphrey to go on to Yale, follow his father into medicine, and take his expected place in the upper middle-class professional world to which the family belonged. Humphrey failed 4 out of 6 courses at Phillips. He was expelled. The details are disputed, but accounts variously include throwing the headmaster into Rabbit Pond, smoking, drinking, and poor grades. His mother told him he was now on his own financially. He enlisted in the Navy. He got the scar and the lisp somewhere during that period. The exact circumstances remain unclear after all these decades. He came back and found his way onto the stage through family connections. He spent the 1920s playing juveniles in drawing room comedies, getting reviews that ranged from lukewarm to dismissive. He was once described by the critic Alexander Woollcott as entirely inadequate, and then, slowly, and then, all at once, he became Humphrey Bogart, the man who looked like he had survived everything and had no illusions left, but would still do the right thing. The man whose face contained experience that couldn't be faked. What is remarkable, knowing where he came from, is how completely he transformed. The Upper West Side surgeon's son, who flunked out of prep school, became the most authentic-seeming man in American cinema. Rick Blaine's world weariness was performed, but it was performed so well that it erased the origin, almost entirely. Number 1. Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly is the one Golden Age star whose family wealth is perhaps the most famous and most often cited. She is, after all, the woman who became Princess of Monaco, but the specifics of how her father built that fortune and what her childhood was really like are less well known than the headline version. She was born Grace Patricia Kelly on November 12, 1929, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the third of 4 children of John Brendan Kelly Sr., known as Jack, and Margaret Major Kelly. Jack Kelly is one of the most remarkable Americans of the 20th century, even setting aside what his daughter accomplished. He grew up as one of 10 children of Irish Catholic immigrants in Philadelphia, worked as a bricklayer, and taught himself to row on the Schuylkill River. He became a national champion sculler. He applied to race at the Henley Royal Regatta in England in 1920, the most prestigious rowing event in the world, and was rejected, reportedly because the rules excluded anyone who had worked with their hands for wages. The bricklayer's application was denied. Jack Kelly went to the 1920 Olympic Games instead and won gold medals in both the single sculls and the double sculls. He sent his racing cap to King George V, along with a short note that read, "Greetings from a bricklayer." He won 126 consecutive races in the single scull. He won 3 Olympic gold medals in total and was named to every major rowing hall of fame. And then he built an empire. Kelly for Brickwork became one of the most successful construction and contracting companies on the East Coast. Jack Kelly made himself a genuine millionaire, not an inherited fortune, not a lucky windfall, but a self-built business fortune, driven by a man of exceptional competitive instincts and relentless energy. By the time Grace was growing up at the family's substantial home in the East Falls neighborhood of Philadelphia, the family was wealthy, prominent, athletic, and Catholic, culturally very similar, as more than one historian has noted, to the Kennedys. Grace wanted to act. Her father disapproved. He considered acting, in his words, a slim cut above streetwalker, which is an interesting perspective from a man whose brother Walter was a successful vaudeville performer and whose other brother George was a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. Uncle George became Grace's primary mentor and helped get her admitted to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. Her father had wanted her to attend, but the school had met its semester quota, and George's influence secured her place. When Grace Kelly met Prince Rainier III of Monaco in 1955, the tiny principality was in genuine financial difficulty. Rainier needed a wealthy American wife to stabilize Monaco's finances and raise its international profile. Jack Kelly paid a dowry of $2 million for the marriage to proceed. Grace was 26, already an Academy Award winner, already one of the most celebrated actresses in the world. She gave all of it up to become Princess of Monaco. She became, over time, one of the most admired royal figures of the 20th century. The Kelly bag, the Hermès sac à dépêche that Princess Grace was famously photographed carrying, using it to shield her pregnant abdomen from paparazzi, was renamed in her honor and remains one of the most valuable and recognizable luxury objects in the world. A bricklayer's granddaughter's name on a French luxury handbag. Jack Kelly, who sent his racing cap to the king, would have found that entirely appropriate. The Hollywood origin story that the studios like to sell was the one where nobody came from anywhere, where talent appeared from thin air, and the dream was available to anyone who wanted it badly enough. The reality was more complicated. Some of the people on this list, Audrey Hepburn, Humphrey Bogart, had backgrounds that gave them advantages and then took most of those advantages away again before their careers began. Some, Grace Kelly, Gene Tierney, had fathers who built corporations and wrote checks specifically to support their ambitions. Some, James Stewart, Myrna Loy, had family standing that gave them educational opportunities and practical confidence without dramatic wealth. All of them worked. All of them had genuine talent. None of the money explained the performances. What the money explained was where the starting line was. If you enjoyed this, like the video, leave a comment below about which name surprised you most, and subscribe. There is a lot more Golden Age history where this came from.